Miss Folby's conviction for the manslaughter of Caleb Folbig, the murder of Patrick Folbig, the murder of Sarah Folbig, and the murder of Laura Folbig be quashed.
A family's worst nightmare came true when all four of their children suddenly died under strange circumstances. At first, it seemed like a series of terrible accidents, but soon, people started to wonder if something more was going on. As the family tried to deal with their loss, questions grew, and the search for answers began. What really happened to the children? Was it just bad luck, or was there something else behind their deaths? The truth would take a long time to uncover, and when it finally came out, it shocked everyone. Kathleen Donovan was born on June 14, 1967, in Ball, Maine, a suburb to the east of Sydney, Australia. Her parents were Kathleen and Thomas, a dock worker from England known by the nickname Tuffy and infamous as a petty criminal. Sadly, Kathleen's childhood was far from the happiness one might hope for. From a young age, her life was marred by tragedy. On January 8, 1969, when Kathleen was just 18 months old, a horrific event changed her life forever. Reports suggest that her mother, Kathleen, had decided to leave the family home, prompting Thomas to pursue her. After a heated confrontation which quickly escalated into violence, Thomas brutally attacked Kathleen's mother with a knife, delivering 24 fatal blows. Her body was left on a street in Sydney, and although an ambulance was called, it was too late. This tragedy left Kathleen motherless, and her father was arrested and sentenced to 15 years in prison before being deported back to Britain. Kathleen was placed under state care and initially sent to live with relatives, but the arrangement was short-lived. She was eventually removed due to complaints about her violent behavior, temper tantrums, and frequent crying. At the age of 3, Kathleen was described in psychiatric reports as disturbed, aggressive, and emotionally troubled. In September 1970, Kathleen was placed with a foster family. She lived with an older brother and sister, but the relationship with her adoptive mother was strained. The woman was cold and controlling, and as Kathleen grew older, they grew further apart. Lacking affection, Kathleen struggled socially, becoming a lonely and isolated child. In school, she preferred spending time with boys rather than girls, further highlighting her alienation. At 15, Kathleen experienced her first love and, for the first time, formed friendships with other girls. This marked the beginning of a lasting friendship with Tracy Chapman, who would remain a central figure throughout Kathleen's life. However, Kathleen's relationship with her adoptive mother continued to deteriorate, especially with the arrival of the first grandchild, which shifted all the attention away from her. Disheartened, Kathleen dropped out of school 6 months before she was due to take her senior exams. By the age of 18, Kathleen's life took another turn when she met Craig Folbig at a nightclub. 5 years her senior, Craig and Kathleen married in 1988 and she adopted his last name. They moved to a suburb of Newcastle, where Kathleen worked as a waitress while Craig was employed at a mining and cider company. Craig, coming from a large family, dreamed of having many children. Kathleen had no difficulty conceiving, and on February 1, 1989, she gave birth to their first child, Caleb. However, the joy of becoming a mother was overshadowed by tragedy. Her baby was born with a mild case of laryngomalacia, which caused partial airway obstruction and difficulty eating. Just 19 days later, Kathleen's worst fear became reality when she discovered that her baby had passed away in his sleep, diagnosed with sudden infant death syndrome. The loss devastated the family, and the obituary referred to the baby as joining his grandmother, who had passed away earlier. Though deeply hurt, Kathleen soon found herself pregnant again, and on June 3, 1990, she gave birth to another son, Patrick. This birth brought new hope, and Craig took 3 months off work to care for his wife and newborn. However, when Patrick was just 4 months old, Kathleen experienced a terrifying ordeal. On October 18th, after placing Patrick in his crib, she discovered that he wasn't breathing. Craig performed CPR while calling for help, and the baby was rushed to the hospital. Miraculously, Patrick survived but was left with severe brain damage, epilepsy, and cortical blindness. Despite surviving the incident, Patrick's condition continued to deteriorate. On February 13, 1991, Kathleen called Craig at work, hysterical and in tears, informing him that Patrick had stopped breathing again. This time, the doctors confirmed that the baby had died of epileptic encephalopathy. The cause of death was noted on the death certificate, and Kathleen and Craig's relationship began to unravel under the weight of their grief. Kathleen was devastated not only by the loss of her children, but also by a rumored infidelity from her husband, Craig. Feeling rejected, abandoned, and betrayed, she struggled with a deep sense of sorrow. Craig left his job at the corporation and started selling cars, turning to alcohol for solace. After some time, the couple decided to seek a fresh start and moved to Thornton, a suburb in southern New South Wales. Kathleen found work at a baby clothing store, and although still battling depression and anxiety, she became pregnant again. On October 14, 1992, Kathleen gave birth to her third child, a daughter named Sarah. Although the baby appeared healthy at first, Kathleen's mind was clouded with fears, and she struggled to bond with her. The dark shadows of past tragedies weighed heavily on her, making every moment with her new daughter feel uncertain. For a while, things seemed to improve as Sarah grew and was loved by her parents. However, when Sarah was 10 months old, she developed a respiratory infection and a fever. Between August 29 and 30, 1993, Kathleen discovered her daughter, lifeless in her crib. The death was later attributed to sudden infant death syndrome, but the grief Kathleen felt was overwhelming. Craig fell into a deep depression following Sarah's death, and the couple's relationship reached its lowest point. Over time, they reconciled and moved to a house in a rural area, hoping for a fresh start. 6 years after Sarah's death, Kathleen became pregnant once more. Craig, determined to protect their new child, consulted experts to ensure a safe environment for the baby. On August 7, 1997, their daughter, Laura Elizabeth, was born. Kathleen described her as a beautiful, perfect baby, even more so than Sarah. For nearly 19 months, the family seemed to live the dream they had longed for. However, on February 27, 1999, a desperate phone call to emergency services would again alter the course of their lives. Kathleen, sobbing uncontrollably, cried out that she had lost 3 children, leaving the operator in shock. The tragedy appeared to repeat itself. While waiting for the ambulance, Kathleen performed CPR, but by the time paramedics arrived, there was nothing that could be done. Laura died while alone with her mother. The circumstances surrounding her death raised serious questions for the doctor who had treated the child. At the time of her death, Laura seemed too old for the cause to be attributed to natural causes. The autopsy report, which noted a fever and inflammation of the heart muscle the day before, prompted further investigation into the possibility of infanticide. As the investigation into the deaths of Kathleen's 3 children unfolded, it became clear that a disturbing pattern was emerging. The doctor shared his concerns with the police, prompting them to look deeper into the situation. Kathleen was the only one present during each tragic incident. Kathleen's personal journals, discovered by Craig, contained unsettling thoughts and reflections on motherhood. One entry read, "With Sarah, all I wanted was for her to be quiet, and one day she did. I knew sometimes I was irritable and cruel with her, and I did leave her, with a little help. I miss her, but I don't feel sad that Laura is here, and she isn't." These diaries, which Kathleen never expected to be found, became a crucial piece of evidence for the prosecution. The police, after reviewing the journals, shifted their investigation towards a criminal inquiry. For 2 years, investigators eavesdropped on the Folag household, interviewed friends and family, and closely examined the case. For 2 years, investigators eavesdropped on the Folbig household, interviewed friends and family, and closely examined the case. In April 2001, Kathleen was arrested and charged with the murder of her 3 children and the attempted murder of a 4th. During her interrogation, it became clear that Kathleen's response to the loss of her children was notably distant and disconnected. Experts in pathology from the UK and the US concluded that all 4 children had been asphyxiated, with Kathleen being the sole person present at each of the deaths. Kathleen pleaded innocent, confident she would be acquitted. The trial, which began on August 25, 2003, garnered media attention both in Australia and internationally. The case sparked a fierce debate about justice and motherhood. The prosecution argued that the children's deaths, occurring within such a short period of time, could not have been natural and that Kathleen had deliberately suffocated her children. The diaries Kathleen kept were used to bolster the prosecution's case, with several entries seen as evidence of her guilt. Among the most damning was a note from 1996 after the deaths of her first 3 children, in which Kathleen wrote, "I am obviously my father's daughter." This was a chilling reference to her father, who had ended her mother's life when Kathleen was a baby. Another entry revealed Kathleen's deep frustration with motherhood. "I feel like the worst mother in the world. I regret my lack of patience and the moments when I was cruel." Laura was described by Kathleen as beautiful, in stark contrast to her older sister, whom Kathleen referred to as more masculine. She saw their differences as something positive, believing that she would not treat Laura the same way she treated Sarah. Kathleen was convinced she could handle Laura's crying episodes better than she had handled those of her late daughter. On November 9, 1997, Kathleen, in a notebook decorated with an image of a teddy bear, wrote about her struggles with Craig, particularly his alcohol problem. In one of his drunken confessions, Craig admitted that he wasn't truly happy and had insecurities about Kathleen's role as a mother. Kathleen expressed that Craig had a morbid fear of Laura, which she found understandable, as she felt the issue lay with her own shortcomings as a mother, not with the babies themselves. One of the most damning statements that would later be scrutinized was her remark about Laura, where she stated that she had left with a little help. This phrase became a focal point for the prosecution. Throughout her trial, Kathleen maintained her innocence, insisting that she had never taken her children's lives or harmed them. She did not believe her husband was responsible either. While no early warning signs had been raised in any of her children, Kathleen's defense proposed natural explanations, such as sudden infant death syndrome and, in Laura's case, myocarditis. Her lawyers presented Kathleen as a loving mother, highlighting the care and concern for her children reflected in some of her journal entries. They argued that the passages the prosecution used as evidence did not contain direct admissions of guilt or clear signs of responsibility. Instead, they suggested these quotes were simply expressions of a grieving mother's guilt and sorrow. The defense also pointed out the lack of physical evidence proving that the children had been suffocated or injured. Forensic experts disagreed on whether there were natural causes for the children's deaths. Additionally, detectives revealed that Kathleen had been recorded walking around her house, rehearsing her testimony for the trial, even practicing the appropriate cries she might need to produce. Kathleen's adoptive sister also testified for the prosecution, claiming that Kathleen had the ability to look someone in the eye and lie openly. On the other hand, defense witnesses spoke of Kathleen's nurturing nature as a mother. The media frenzy escalated with Craig's testimony, where he described Kathleen as a mother under constant stress, prone to extreme mood swings. He acknowledged that she had lost control with the children on several occasions and had faced serious challenges with motherhood. The social services records on Kathleen were also used against her, painting her troubled past and history of trauma as evidence to question her capacity as a mother and raising doubts about her mental state. As the trial extended over 7.5 weeks, the mounting evidence increasingly suggested her guilt. Kathleen chose not to testify, allowing her journals to speak for her. On October 21, 2013, the Australian court sentenced Kathleen to 40 years in prison. Kathleen collapsed upon hearing the guilty verdict. She was speechless, with only tears flowing down her face. As she was escorted from the courtroom, her legs seemed to give way, and she was nearly dragged down the stairs to her cell. Initially placed in a segregated protective unit due to the nature of her crimes, Kathleen faced harassment, threats, and physical assaults from other inmates, as crimes against children were considered the most heinous. Over time, Kathleen worked in prison jobs and became a sort of protective figure for other inmates. Her legal team appealed the conviction, arguing that the trial had been based primarily on circumstantial evidence, especially the diaries, which were presented in incomplete form and taken out of context, making them easy to misinterpret. They emphasized that there was no scientific evidence supporting the allegations against her. In February 2005, the court reduced Kathleen's sentence to 30 years, with 25 years to be served without parole. Throughout this period, Kathleen continued to proclaim her innocence. By 2010, a group of friends led by Tracy launched a petition for her release. Tracy had not only provided constant emotional support but had become an active advocate for Kathleen's case, working tirelessly to keep the focus on her cause. In 2011, Emma, a professor from the University of British Columbia, became interested in Kathleen's case while working on her doctoral thesis. Emma analyzed the trial's evidence and arguments, concluding that Kathleen had been wrongly convicted. Her findings were published in a book titled Murder, Medicine, and Motherhood, where she critiqued the flaws in the Australian judicial system and argued that Kathleen had been unjustly sentenced based on misleading medical evidence and damaging interpretations of her diaries. In 2013, Emma appeared on a major TV program, presenting her conclusions, which led Kathleen's legal team to request a thorough review of the case by renowned forensic pathologist Stephen Corner. His 121-page report reviewed the medical evidence presented during the trial and concluded that the deaths of Caleb and Sarah were correctly classified as sudden infant death syndrome. Furthermore, the severe seizures Patrick had experienced and Laura's myocarditis provided a more plausible explanation for their deaths, with no evidence of suffocation. Following these findings, Kathleen's legal team gathered a group of legal academics and students to review the case in depth. In June 2015, they submitted an official petition, including the forensic pathologist report, to the Attorney General's office in Sydney, requesting a judicial review. In 2018, with the unwavering support of Tracy, a documentary-style television series was produced, culminating in the first exclusive interview with Kathleen. During this interview, conducted via multiple 6-minute phone calls recorded secretly from prison, Kathleen spoke to Tracy about her daily life, her routines, and life in prison, offering a glimpse into her world. During a program, Kathleen spoke openly for the first time about her ex-husband Craig, the trial, her children, and the profound sorrow she felt when they lost their lives. She also explained the meaning behind the entries in her diary, offering a personal perspective. Kathleen shared that she often blamed herself for everything, feeling that mothers should carry the weight of responsibility for their children's well-being. One of the most controversial diary entries, in which she mentioned that her daughter, left with a little help, was clarified by Kathleen. She explained that she was referring to God or some higher power, something beyond her understanding at the time. Kathleen had never testified at her trial because she couldn't bear the thought of being attacked for what she had written in her diaries. However, after 15 years in prison, she regretted not taking the stand. Her life in prison had been far from easy. In one instance, Kathleen was convicted for assaulting another inmate over a toaster, which violated strict safety rules due to its potential fire hazard. After the altercation, Kathleen was moved to another correctional facility, where she was beaten and left with bruises and cuts, as the other women didn't want someone like her in their unit. Just 9 days after the Australian Stories program aired on August 22, 2018, the New South Wales Attorney General announced a judicial review of Kathleen's conviction to restore public trust in the administration of justice. That same month, Kathleen's legal team reached out to Dr. Carola Garcia, a Spanish immunologist who was a pioneer in using advanced techniques to analyze genetic sequences, aiming to identify links to diseases. A year later, the investigation into Kathleen's case ended with disappointing results. The former senior judge assigned to review the trial expressed a desire to rely solely on his own judgment and refused assistance from experts in analyzing Kathleen's diaries. In a report published in July 2019, the judge concluded that no reasonable scientific explanation had been found for the deaths of Kathleen's children, reaffirming her guilt. The judge dismissed the new findings and claimed Kathleen's explanations only strengthened the case against her. Kathleen's lawyers appealed the decision to the New South Wales Court of Appeal, arguing that the judge had failed to consider the possibility that the deaths were natural. By then, Kathleen had lost all hope, and the confirmation of her conviction pushed her into a deep state of despair, feeling that any chance of redemption had completely vanished. However, in a turn of events on March 4, 2021, a petition from the Australian Academy of Sciences revived her hope. The petition, signed by over 100 eminent scientists, including 2 Nobel laureates, called on the Governor of New South Wales to pardon Kathleen and release her immediately. The petition included scientific and medical explanations for each of the children's deaths, claiming they were due to a rare genetic mutation. The research, conducted by a team of 27 scientists, suggested that the deaths could be attributed to this mutation, which caused arrhythmias and sudden cardiac death. The new evidence, including genetic testing, provided a solid foundation for Kathleen's innocence. The analysis revealed that Sarah and Laura shared a genetic mutation that was linked to heart conditions and sudden death. Additionally, the study found that Caleb and Patrick carried rare gene variants that caused epileptic seizures. Until then, only 134 cases of the potentially fatal heart condition related to this mutation had been documented worldwide. The groundbreaking scientific research was published in a journal by the European Society of Cardiology, and Kathleen's case was overturned. Her legal team also enlisted the help of 7 experts in psychiatry, psychology, forensic science, and linguistics to review Kathleen's diaries. All agreed that the diaries did not contain incriminating evidence. Rather, they simply reflected a mother who was grieving the loss of her children, overwhelmed with stress and depression, and often felt responsible. One psychiatrist concluded that after reading Kathleen's journals, he could only say that she had been a good mother. 2 years later, on June 14, 2023, Kathleen received a historic pardon from the governor of New South Wales after spending 2 decades in prison. The review of her case confirmed that there were reasonable doubts about her guilt, and the diary entries used against her were found to be unreliable admissions of responsibility. All 4 charges were dropped. After her release, Kathleen was sent to a farm in northern New South Wales, where she reunited with her friend and advocate Tracy. Kathleen expressed deep gratitude for the scientific and genetic findings that finally cleared her name, and she voiced her hope that no one else would have to endure the suffering she had faced. Despite having spent 20 years behind bars, Kathleen, now 55 years old, was deeply happy and grateful. She had prayed every day for her name to be cleared, and although she lamented that the system had been quick to blame her instead of acknowledging the possibility that children can sometimes die unexpectedly, she was thankful to those who fought for her. The news of Kathleen's release was not well received by her ex-husband Craig, who dismissed the scientific findings and, through his lawyers, requested a new trial. For him, this would be the only fair way to present the new evidence before a jury to determine Kathleen's guilt or innocence. However, Craig never had the chance to pursue this request, as he passed away suddenly from a heart attack in March 2024. He had been battling a terminal illness that had been affecting his health for some time. Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations.